Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ms. Nancy McLernon, Chief Executive Officer of the Organization for International Investment, to moderate a discussion on tax and regulatory reforms.
Hi, good morning. I am Nancy McLernon, President and CEO of the Organization for International Investment. We are a business association based in Washington, D.C., comprised of more than 200 international companies in the United States. Companies including Switzerland-based Nestle, Korea-based Samsung, Japan-based Toyota, India-based Wipro, and Germany-based Siemens. We're an advocacy group. We work with policymakers at the federal and sub-federal level to ensure that U.S. laws and regulations provide an equal opportunity for international companies to succeed in the U.S. market right alongside their domestic counterparts. In fact, we are the only organization exclusively focused on these issues and promoting a strong understanding of the value international companies bring to the United States. And I am proud to sing the praises of our member companies around the country to ensure that Americans know that when an international company sets up shop in the United States, they bring much more than just capital. When international companies invest in the United States, it gives other countries a stake in our economic success. It puts them on the same side of the economic ledger as the U.S. economy, and it means their home countries now have a stake in America's success. International companies help diversify America's economy, and it makes it more resilient. They also spur economic productivity in the United States. And having worked on international tax and regulatory issues for nearly 30 years, I'm really pleased to moderate this conversation today and joined by a great group of folks to have this conversation. Each represents an important segment of the U.S. economy, and all have their pulse on the real-world effects that recent reforms have made. Joining me today are Reg Seshadri, who is president for U.S. issuers at Mastercard, where she is responsible for managing and expanding partnerships and business with banks and credit unions across the U.S. Raj holds a Master's of Business Administration from Stanford University and a PhD in physics from Harvard. Matt Gibson is head of investment banking client coverage at Goldman Sachs. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Matt joined Goldman Sachs in 2001 and has risen up the ranks to head up one of the most important divisions within his company. And last but not least, because Siemens is a member of our organization, Barbara Humpton. She is Chief Executive of Siemens USA. While Barbara assumed that role in the beginning of June, she's been part of the Siemens family for a number of years and now heads a company that has operated in the United States since before Abraham Lincoln was president. Wow. So to start off, I'd like to ask each of you how you would talk about the U.S. business environment now for the international companies that are in this room and others that are thinking about investing in the United States. And maybe, Barbara, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you to SelectUSA. It is a true privilege to be here today. 160 years ago, Siemens established what would then be considered a small business, made an investment here in the U.S., and that business has grown to about $24 billion in revenue annually. You know, we look at this and we're operating in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. And this kind of growth was really made possible through partnerships with all levels of government. We've been working with economic development offices in every one of these states. And what we've been building is, at its core, an infrastructure business. If you think about the really critical infrastructure that we deal with today, from transportation to power and utilities, to healthcare. These and the transformation of industry that's going on right now represent real needs for our society. Now, how do we do all of this? We have 50,000 employees across the U.S. We have 60 sites where we do manufacturing, digital projects, or research and development. We've been investing about $1 billion a year, and we've become a net exporter globally with about $5.5 billion in exports elsewhere in the world. It's not just Siemens, though. It's our supply chain. We've got 36,000 companies in our supply chain, and many of them are small businesses. When we took a look a couple years ago at the kind of impact this business has on the US economy, we estimated about 800,000 jobs that are driven by the Siemens Corporation, both here and around the globe. So as partners, and thank you, Nancy, we've been members in your organization. As partners, we think it's absolutely critical to be active in the regulatory environment. We've been thrilled to see what's happened with tax reform. We want to see the tax reform regulatory structure continue to be strengthened. And then we're really behind this, the concept of streamlining regulations and things that I'm sure you're hearing a lot about today. Because all of this is really a structure that affects us directly, but also affects our customers. You look at our ecosystem, our customers are dealing with very complex infrastructure. Infrastructure does take 20 to 30 years of planning in advance, whether we're talking power or transportation or otherwise. So the frameworks that we're working on together are absolutely essential, and we've got a very bullish view of what's coming. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Matt?
Thanks. It's great to be here. For those of you who don't know Goldman Sachs, we provide advice and raise capital for companies and governments around the world. I work in the investment banking division, where I cover a range of about 30 clients across the world and lead an organization for clients. We think the U.S. right now is a really good place to invest. We have the most liquid and well-functioning capital markets in the world, and very healthy environment right now. We're at a time in the cycle where small business confidence is the second highest, I think, of all time. CEO confidence is incredibly high. It's a little lower than it was in Q1, just given some of this tariff back and forth, but it's still relatively high. And consumer confidence is also high. And so for folks looking to invest around the world in a place where there's a rule of law that's relatively well designed, and capital markets that are supportive of investment, and states, and you can see all the governors and other folks from the individual states here that want your investment, we think that the U.S. is a really great place on a relative basis to do business right now. It's not perfect, no place ever is, but when you think about the growth in this country right now, given how big we are to grow at we're growing at, some of that driven by we find this environment right now to be a very good one.
Great. Thanks. Raj?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be here. So for those of you who don't know Mastercard, we're a global company in the payment space. We're a technology company, and we essentially help make complete transactions for consumers, for commercial clients, for small business clients, help move money, payments across the globe for them. And so our focus is to get beyond a world of cash and checks and to digitize transactions, because that always drives economic growth. As a result of that, we also spend a lot of time focusing on safety and security, keeping the payments safe, on innovation in digital, making them digital so that they're easier to use, and then also on data and analytics. Because as you can imagine, we don't have any personal information, but we see a lot of transactional information. And I'm responsible for, I work in the US markets, I'm responsible for US banks here. And you know, what I would say about the US market now is we look at personal consumption expense, which is how healthy consumers are, how they're spending based on our data. And the latest numbers show that year on year, it's actually gone up 5.5%. So the US consumer is spending more, they're healthier, households are healthier. And some of this is coming from things like the tax reform. We always see the more affluent segments spending is pretty stable, irrespective of you know, how their cash flows go up and down. But what the tax reform does do, from what we can see, is the mass affluent and the mass segments are spending more and contributing to the economy. And the contributions are also actually, if you peel the onion, coming from an interesting source in terms of what they're spending on. We're seeing things like department store spending and retail spending out of retail locations going down, more e-commerce. And we're also seeing more spending on experiences. So dining out, travel, on experiences over things.
Yeah,
so
great.
very healthy economy. Good to invest here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So let's talk a little bit about tax reform. Let's dig into that. When the U.S. Congress and the administration signed into law the tax reform legislation, our organization came out in support of it. We feel that the tax reform has made the United States more competitive for international investment, for your companies to be investing here. And it was long overdue. I think that the competitiveness for some of the global business had fallen because the U.S. tax system had gone so out of whack with major trading partners. So, Barbara, how do you feel that the tax bill has impacted U.S. competitiveness?
Oh, we are right with you on this one. First, we applaud the efforts of the administration and the Congress. Getting the tax reform package passed in 2017 was truly a monumental effort. And what we see is that the tax reforms and the lower corporate tax rate actually set the stage for greater investment. We ourselves are making investments that are going to allow us to expand our business. And as I said earlier, so are our customers. What we're working on now, and some of this with Nancy and her team, is that question of how do we ensure that the regulatory framework from top to bottom in all of our jurisdictions is aligned so that we recognize the true benefit.
Yeah, excellent. Raj, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing companies do, or what Mastercard in particular is doing with the tax savings?
Yeah, the tax reform has been terrific. It has allowed us to invest both in our business as well as in the economy here. So we've done things like, I'll give you some examples. For our own employees in their defined contribution 401k plans, it's allowed us to take our matching contribution from 6% to 10%. And we encourage all of them to maximize their contribution. And this match allows us to encourage that even more and get them to do more and think about retirement earlier. So that's one thing. A second thing that we've done is we've, for a very long time, have had a Center for Inclusive Growth. So we strongly believe in doing well and in doing good. And so focusing and investing on sustainable, inclusive economic growth is very important for us. And one of the things that the tax reform enabled us to do is to create a new nonprofit fund within the center. We're funding it at $500 million over 5 years. And that will enable us to do even more to drive sustainable, inclusive economic development. And in addition to that, what it also allows us to do for our own business is invest more in R&D, in innovation, both organically as well as inorganically. So it also helps us, we've bought several companies in the recent past, in the US most recently, Brighterion, which is a machine learning and AI company. And so it helps us sort of drive a lot of that innovation organically and inorganically.
You mentioned an acquisition, so I'm actually going to turn to Matt and ask him, how do you feel that tax reform has impacted deal making, has impacted cross-border acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is it's early days. So these deals tend to take a while to gestate, to come together and to get done. And so I think the proof will be in the pudding down the road. But I would say in general, it's made the companies here in the US more attractive and more competitive as they think about competing globally. And so if you're a company that's outside the US looking to make a US acquisition, there's a few things that are going through your mind right now. The first is that there seems to be in the US a pro-business environment. So that's one big macro factor. That gets a little bit into tax, but it also gets into regulatory, which I know we're going to talk about. The second thing that you're thinking about as you're looking at the US is honestly some of the tariff back and forth that's happening in the press, and you're wondering, is that just near-term negotiation, or is that going to have long-term impacts? And then you're thinking third about regulatory approval. And I would say one of the things that's happened in the economy over the last 20 years is technology and digital. We've moved from having technology and digital companies to a place where every company is technology and digital. Mm-hmm. And so when you think about companies that are getting acquired, having that technological know-how and in some cases, intelligence is going to be scrutinized by the government more. And so if you're an acquirer from outside the US looking at getting inside the US, you want to make sure that you can get through CFIUS and the other hurdles. And right now, obviously, the Senate's passed one bill. It hasn't been passed in the House, so there's a little bit of flux in terms of what the rules will be. But if you take a giant step back, with all that having been said, the U.S. right now is the biggest market that's growing as fast as we are, with the rule of law and a pro-business environment. And so I think companies around the world should want to do business here. But those are the things that they're navigating.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you mentioned that I want to pick up on. You've talked about the tariffs now twice.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and sort of get into that just a little bit. I know from working in this space for many decades that there is a very strong linkage between competitiveness for foreign direct investment and trade agreements, rules of law trading system. And, so many of our companies are speaking with the governors that are in town this week and raising concerns about sort of disruption with our trading partners. I think we all agree that sometimes, it is necessary to address other countries' policies that aren't following the rule of law. So just wondering if any of you all, and maybe I'll bump it over to Barbara first, can kind of talk about this space and sort of how are you viewing the environment that this is all germinating in?
Yeah, well, let me make a couple of just, I think, very basic points. One, we're a global company. We believe in open and fair trade with rules that can be enforced. I mean, that's fundamental to our ability to have a vibrant economy worldwide. And we know that will drive growth as the global supply chain parties serve one another. We also believe in trade agreements and actually the use of multilateral organizations in order to help us work our way through the discussions that arise around fair and open trade. I think this is vital as we look at today's environment. I know that we do have a lot of noise in the system, but I'm convinced that we're going to get through this. And that what we're going to find is, yes, things being dealt with slightly differently, but fairness and a level playing field are our end objective. And that's going to bring prosperity to all of us.
Well said, well said. Anyone else on the panel want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I think when businesses and CEOs dislike the most in general is uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And in business, there's already a ton of uncertainty when you make investments about what the return's going to be, but when the rules are potentially changing, that makes people pause and think about whether or not they want to do X, Y, or Z. I tend to think that, to Barbara's point, longer term we'll get to the right place. I think what's happening over the last 3 months and maybe over the next 3 is obviously politics and negotiating, and the U.S. government's got a point of view that some of those trade laws need to be tweaked. And while we're going through that, there'll be a period of turbulence. That's okay. But I think at the end of the day, as long as global companies like the 3 that are represented up here know what the rules are, mm-hmm. then we can make decisions and make economic and good decisions. And so I think what we're all kind of waiting for is to get to that place.
Right. And I know certainly our membership is very bullish on investing in the United States and hope we get to that right place sooner rather than later. So let's talk a little bit about the regulatory environment. Another thing, Matt, you mentioned was CFIUS. CFIUS is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and it's an interagency review body that reviews foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies for national security purposes. And as Matt mentioned, there is legislation to amend that process. And the Senate has passed legislation to amend it. Our organization supports that. So I know that some of you may be hearing and wondering about, when you read in the press, views on the legislation that is making its way through Congress now. But as an organization, we obviously support protecting our defense-related national security. We want to ensure that those reviews are not politicized. And, it needs to be changed based on, it's been 10 years since it was revised. Things that impact our national security and technology is changing all the time. So we are supportive of changes that the Senate has put forward. And there's a House bill as well that we hope to see this passed into law this year. So beyond that, I'm going to ask Raj for you to talk a little bit about the current regulatory environment in the U.S. and how you see it in sort of impacting our competitiveness.
So we are a technology company in the payment space. And so I'll talk about it in the context of financial institutions and banks who are partners, and that's where we focus primarily. What we've seen, the changes that we've seen in, for example, the OCC or the CFPB to streamline and simplify appropriately, in a prudent way, some of the regulatory burden is actually a good thing for the companies here because they can then invest more of their resources, people, capital, et cetera, into growth, into innovation, into acquisitions, et cetera. So we like the direction that we're seeing and commend that.
Yeah, others?
Yeah,
Barbara?
I'd love to share a couple of observations. First of all, I don't know if people have heard about the initiative within the administration that for every new regulation, the goal is to remove 2 obsolete or overly burdensome regulations. What that means to us, you've been hearing us talk about a transformation that's happening in each of our businesses to digital. And we know that the pace of change is accelerating. We've got a regulatory framework that simply can't evolve quickly enough. So this idea of removing burdensome regulation makes a real difference in our business. And let me just tell you a couple of examples. Think about the energy space. The energy space is changing rapidly. So the idea of the government streamlining their regulations around project permitting has made a big difference for us. The idea that there's a lead agency for every project who can coordinate and make sure that we hit the streamlined project milestones. Those are game changers for us. And we're actually seeing that as the grid transforms. So think about something as simple as energy storage. Energy storage is the holy grail as the grid transforms and we see more renewable energy used. And that renewable energy can be intermittent in nature. You need storage to help shore up energy supply. Well, we all see the grand potential ahead of us. Imagine the city of LA with a new electric vehicle infrastructure. Our analysis shows they're going to require a 1,500% increase in electricity just to serve the transportation sector. Who's going to be able to fill that void? Well, we think energy storage is going to be critical to that. So the work that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is doing in order to streamline requirements and regulations around storage helps to enable that kind of transformation. These are just a couple of the examples that we have. Don't even get me started on liquefied natural gas, where the commitment of the administration to streamline and expedite export facility licenses can be important to our customers. We provide technology along the whole life cycle, from gas supply to liquefaction, transport, and consumer use. And regulatory change all along that chain is going to enable real growth for our customers. So those are just a few examples.
Yeah, that's great. Matt?
I think the only thing I would add is that when it comes to regulation, there's tone, and then there's content. And both are equally important. And there's been times in the history of the country where the tone coming from Washington seemed to be one that was negative or onerous towards business. And I would say one of the things that this administration has done well is to send a signal that they are very open for business and positive towards business, and business feels supported. And so I think that's part of why you see CEO confidence and the like so high. In terms of content, I would say it's industry specific. If you had people from all different industries up here, they might feel differently. But I would say in general, the direction that things are headed in, fewer regulations, sensible regulations, is something that we support.
Great. We had meetings yesterday with Governors Bevin and Holcomb, and the attack on sort of unnecessary regulation is not only happening at the federal level, it's happening at the state level. They talked about how Kentucky and Indiana are really working to streamline the process. Governor Bevin was talking about how he wants to get you in and out to sort of evaluate the state and then move on. But then once you're there, of course, making sure that you have this streamline to kind of get up and going, and as you're working on sort of moving your business forward in the United States. Can any of you talk about some specific states that you've worked with that have helped you not only get your operations running, but have partnered with you to ensure that you grow and succeed, where they've worked with you perhaps on workforce training, R&D partnerships, regulatory aftercare assistance? Barbara?
I certainly can. Raj, do you have something you want to add?
Please go ahead.
Let me share a story again on this energy thread, because really it's, we think about the whole life cycle of power. We also think about the life cycle of employees who grow up in this industry, and they're headed to a new future. A couple years ago, we recognized the need to strengthen our capabilities around energy. We chose the Charlotte area for our new energy hub, and we're doing generators and large turbines. And we recognized we needed a workforce. In fact, we had real needs for jobs, but knew we needed a program to help prepare people for those jobs. The state of North Carolina and the local community worked with us. In fact, we worked with the Central Piedmont Community College and established an apprenticeship program. And
something you probably had in Germany. You imported it here, right?
Right. Think of this as one of the Siemens' most important imports into the country, is that focus on a new way of educating folks that we haven't necessarily used broadly in the U.S. But here in North Carolina, we've done that, and that partnership at the state and local level made that possible. A $300 million investment by Siemens, the collaborative work of the community, and I'll share with you that when we opened up job requisitions, we had 1,000 jobs that needed to be filled. We had 10,000 applicants. And we now have apprentices who are going through their education process, paid for by Siemens. They are getting on-the-job training, and they're coming out and graduating into entry-level positions with Siemens, paying around $55,000 a year, and no debt. So yeah, it really is an important, it takes the whole community to make these things possible.
Right, great.
Yeah,
Raj?
I would echo that too. It takes a whole community. It takes private sector partnerships as well as public-private partnerships, and around specific problems in order to make a difference and to move the needle. So I'll give you a few different examples of different types of partnerships with either local or state governments, as well as with other private sector organizations coming together. So one of our focuses is around, there are about 50 million workers in the US that are gig economy workers now. And what that, when you think about their lives and look at their households, they have a lot of uncertainty in how their payments come in, how the income comes in. There's a variability in the sources of income, but at the same time, there's a steadiness in terms of the expenditures. And for some of these folks, a $400 expense can, an unexpected medical expense, a car expense can set them off. It can really put them into a different trajectory. And so we've worked with a number of government agencies as well as private agencies to figure out how we can help think through what would make life better, easier in terms of cash flow management for a gig economy worker. So for example, we worked with Care.com to help the caregivers that they serve figure out how to use digital budgeting in order to facilitate the payment flow so they can match the income to their expenditures. So that would be one example. Another example, very different, is we work on smarter cities, helping cities become much more digital and data-driven. So as an example, we worked with the Chicago Transit to figure out how they could price at off-peak hours in order to balance the load. And I was just talking about gig economy workers. There are people that might be willing to pay less to go at an off-peak time, and that actually helps the transit system run a lot better. In the city of New York, I'm sure you've heard of city bikes. When they first started putting city bikes out, the local community started objecting to having these things around. And we showed using our data that when you actually put a city bike stand in, the local economy grows. The commercial development of the area actually increases. And since then, it's been embraced quite broadly. So that's one that we did with NYU researchers as well as NYC.
Yeah, that's great.
So many of these examples across the country.
Yeah. Matt, do you have anything to add on that?
we have a program called 10,000 Small Businesses. And what we do is we go into individual cities around the world, primarily the US so far, and we recruit and mentor and train entrepreneurs that own businesses with revenues. I think it's between 100,000 and 3 million. It's somewhere in there. They graduate. It's on-the-job training. It's business school training. And what we find when we do that, frankly, it doesn't matter where you go, you get engagement from the local community because everybody wants to grow. The mayor in that town wants their economy to be better. The people in that town want to grow their businesses. I think the challenge or the rub sometimes comes down to funding. And so you have to find the right funding, but we don't really find it to be state-specific. In fact, most of our clients operate across multiple states. But I would say the local leadership and just about every place we go is engaging with us when we want to help.
Great. So we have just about 4 more minutes left. I want to turn to looking toward the future, right? So we sort of talked about what the current environment is, and so let's talk about what you all think the U.S. climate for international companies looks like for the next 2 to 3 years, right? So Matt, why don't we start with you?
So we're at Goldman Sachs, we're quite constructive on the next 2 or 3 years. We obviously watch the economy very closely. We look for signs of excess. We look for pockets of growth. And in the U.S. in particular, we think that in 18 and 19, as a firm, it's going to be a pretty good place to do business. The impacts of tax reform are just starting to be felt because it's only been several months since we started. The regulatory needle is going to continue to move. And so no one can claim to look out 10 years. But certainly for the next couple, we think that this is a country where foreign companies should want to be. And frankly, as a country, we should want them here.
Yeah, great. Barbara?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Matt has said. He's commented earlier that we've got all the right conditions here. We've got the natural resources, the rule of law. I'll add to that we've got the most skilled and educated workforce, and we've got an entrepreneurial spirit here that really is driving a change. I think that if you come to the U.S., you'll find an innovation engine that is unrivaled by others. And what we're looking for as our Siemens Corporation continues to grow globally, we're looking to invest even more here and to use this engine in order to drive global growth. And I'll invite you to come and join us.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned the entrepreneurial spirit. I hear all the time, that from our member companies, and when I go talk to the headquarters of our companies, the try again spirit of the U.S., where in some markets, if you fail, you're a failure. But the United States, failure is just, a step in the process. Raj?
Now, I'll echo what both of them said, which is we're optimistic over the next 2 or 3 years. We see, when we look at the spend data for both consumers and commercial businesses in the US, it looks really healthy, and it's growing very nicely. It's an economic environment, as you were saying, that fosters investment. And when we look at innovation, and we spend a lot of time in innovation around biometrics and around digital technologies, machine learning, AI, the pace of innovation and the entrepreneurship here is quite exciting. So yes, very bullish.
Yeah. So we do a CFO survey every year. We do it twice a year. And the confidence of our members is the highest it's been in quite some time. So on behalf of the more than 200 very significant foreign companies in the United States, they also are bullish on the economy. And we talked about some of the disruptions that are going on, and I think that hopefully these will be blips, and that will continue chugging forward. So I just like to remind everybody, and I know that you all probably know it, but it's my job to do so, is just remind that when international companies make a very deliberate decision to invest in the United States, employ U.S. workers, do counterintuitive things like train the U.S. workforce for tomorrow, become a net exporter, do an enormous amount of R&D here. These companies are part of America's success story. We believe that We know that the policymakers at our sub-federal level and here in Washington really understand that. Getting your companies engaged once you are in the U.S., talking to your policymakers on the issues that impact you, even though you're not a homegrown company, is really important. And the impact that your companies can make here in the United States is enormous. And I certainly know that working on behalf of these companies for nearly 30 years, it's been a pleasure. So with that, join me in thanking the panel. Join me in thanking Secretary Ross for organizing this incredible 3-day event specifically devoted to recruiting foreign direct investment, showing that foreign direct investment is an economic priority for this administration. And I think that's something we should all acknowledge and appreciate. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.